The 6-seat Cessna 184 Little Bird sat idle on the tarmac at LAX, sandwiched between the United Airlines cargo hangar and the looming towers of the corporate hotels just outside airport property. The Radisson, Marriott, and Grand Hyatt, hulking concrete monoliths, leftovers from the distant and fading fringe of the Cold War. Upstarts like the Sonesta Blue and Crossfader, an upscale Ramada, added small dashes of color and reflective glass, but still represented the world of the business traveler. Nobody stayed at the airport unless they had to. Nancy Hess had wanted to be a pilot for as long as she could remember. She received her wings, so to speak, at 10 years of age on a twin-engine prop flight from Laramie to Denver, the pilot coming into the cabin specifically to deliver the plastic wings to Nancy in person. "Here you go, darling," he said. Nancy remembered the slow and drawn-out suppleness of the dar in darling. It was perhaps the first time she had felt the effect of a strange compliment from a strange man. The pilot came on the intercom as the plane lifted from the tarmac. "Hang on, Nancy," he said. "Here we go." She attained her actual wings at 14 after displaying an aptitude and tenacity for the controls from the moment the cabin door closed and latched, from the moment her white Stan Smiths pressed on the forward control pedals. Her parents chose to homeschool her, so her schedule would allow for more time in the simulator. She was normally at the airfield by 8 a.m. and often the first pilot of any skill level in the air. Nancy loved to fly when the light still held color, when the yellows and reds of the sun painted the Earth's contours down below. Nancy graduated high school in just under 18 months, excelling in math and science. But school felt like something for other people with time and a lack of direction. She was recruited by several colleges but accepted a deferred scholarship to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. 2 years too young to begin her formal training, she instead utilized the time to race through her non-flight basics. Her parents rented an apartment near campus where Nancy spent her nights. She and her father poring over aviation maps from the 1950s and 1960s. The academy proved a real test. For the first time, Nancy felt like there might be others who were better, more skilled. Doubt became a thing. She graduated with honors and began a track to be a commercial airline pilot, one of the youngest ever accepted candidates. But her time in the T-38 fighter trainer had left an impression on Nancy. There was nothing quite like a lightweight, overpowered structure to wrap oneself in. Rolls-Royce engines finely tuned and roaring at the world. The ground racing by with an accelerated heartbeat. The world full of hope. So instead of choosing the expected career, Nancy chose combat. She left her commercial training and enlisted in the Air Force Advanced Tactical Unit. Her call sign or designator was Tomahawk, given to her by her commanding officer and the other higher-ranking flight instructors. Nancy qualified on the F-16 and F-18, and even got hours in the state-of-the-art F-35, a fourth-generation fighter that lacked the dogfighting abilities of the older jets, but contained technology that could kill enemy aircraft before they even knew they were in the fight. Afghanistan was where she had to deploy her flares for the first time. The missile came from a cave complex near Khost, most likely a leftover from the post-Soviet implosion that was modern Afghanistan. Technically, she didn't need to deploy her flares, but it was an ice-break moment, a christening of sorts. You are here now. This is real. You could die. Although her side had near total control over the skies, they did lose planes and pilots, and Nancy lost friends. People who had endured the same training regime, regimented testing, and long hours. People who had the same skill level. There was no margin for error in war, and at 500 feet and 500 knots, a loose bolt could mean a chaplain being summoned to the house of your loved ones. Dark suits, heads down, we regret to inform you. Nancy's life centered around sidewinders, JDAMs, bunker busters, and cluster munitions, turning and burning. But the impacts of her work were reduced to circular flashes on a heads-up display, the bone and ash and drama fading quickly as she powered over her rolls at a safe distance high above. She completed her mandatory 2 tours but signed up for 2 more, and when the theater changed from Afghanistan to Iraq, she kept signing on. Combining her short stints of R&R and her continual training requirements, her time in war came to a neat, clean 10 years. 10 years for Tomahawk. As the war wound down, Nancy retired from the service, wrote a book about her exploits, and accepted a junior position at a regional airline based in Los Angeles. Her military career was great bar fodder, but didn't mean much in the civilian world. The carrier Black Wing had both propeller-driven aircraft and jets. She was a logical choice for jets, but specifically asked for prop so she could relearn the fundamentals that made her fall in love with flight in the beginning. Corporate gave her milk run routes, San Diego, San Francisco, and the occasional run to Palm Desert. There was little drama, at least in the air. But there was a come down from the war. The deserts of Southern California had a strange resemblance to Helmand Province and the landscapes near Basra. Sometimes as she approached the airfield, she would feel an urgent need to drop her payload, pull hard on the stick, and roll hard right while releasing her flares, exhaling hard and sucking deep on the oxygen mask. But outside of her passengers, there was no payload, no smoke in the air, and the only flare came from light through time-stained windows. Nancy mostly kept it together, knowing her switch to better planes, better routes, and better pay were all within her grasp. Nancy's cell phone rang in the cockpit of the Little Bird. She reached down for the phone, recognized her father's number, but didn't answer. She flipped the phone to silent, then turned up the volume on the plane's headset. She heard a familiar call from the tower, repeated and growing more urgent. Nancy removed the headset and placed it on the co-pilot seat. She hummed a nursery rhyme her mother had taught her as a child. She reached up for the door strap and pulled down hard, securing the door. She choked the plane, checked her mix, and fired up the single engine. A man in a golf cart pulled up outside the plane, an orange safety light flashing from the top of the cart. Nancy waved and gave him a thumbs up. He raised both arms in response and then shrugged his shoulders, his head tilted slightly to one side. Nancy gave another thumbs up and throttled up the Cessna. She taxied to a seldom-used runway and aimed the plane west into the prevailing wind and the unlimited Pacific. The glint of light over the ocean surface reminded her of the sun off the fractured steel and heat and earth of Mosul, the obliterated life and all that remained after ISIS came to town. Her memories of shattering bombs and missiles pounding rubble into smaller and smaller pieces of nothing. As the coastline began to fade behind her, Nancy banked the Cessna hard right and aimed the nose back around towards the airport. She climbed to 2,500 feet and leveled off. Her phone flashed missed call after missed call, the dash of the Cessna lit by tiny clusters of red and orange flashing beacons. She thought of the mission at hand as she nosed over and began her descent. She could just make out the Hollywood sign in the distance to the north. Her fingers calm and dry on the controls, she pushed forward, increased her speed, and aimed the Cessna at the very center of the Hilton Airport suites. The surrounding buildings becoming a blur to her left and right. She thought of the faces and touching moments of joy, of flickering light and backlit dust on a sunny afternoon, of family gatherings and celebrations, of truth and kindness. She thought of all the glory in the world. As she pushed the thrust to maximum and nosed the plane down into the steel and concrete and fading promises of second chances, she flicked on her communications for one last nod to the tower. "Tomahawk out," she said, as the world fused into gold.